I'm Ajahn Sona. This is Birken Forest Monastery's live stream. This will consist of a brief talk and a question and answer period. The title of this talk is How Civilization is Maintained. And then we have an opportunity for questions and answers, and they can be on the topic or other areas of Dhamma, which you would like to know about. So Buddhism has a couple of factors the Buddha talked about, and in Pali, the language that the discourses of the Buddha is preserved in, these are called the guardians of the world, the Hiri Otapa. Hiri and dash Otapa, two separate words. Loka Pala. Loka is the world. Pala is guardian. So these are the guardians of the world. And we might say it's not merely the physical world that we're guarding, or even the continuation of the world. It's actually the continuation of civilized behavior in the world. Something, a condition which one would be happy to live in. And it can be very easy to slide away. And if these two guardians are not present, then what we would call civilization, and many of you watching are privileged to be alive at a time in history where civilization is still functioning. There have been periods of history where civilization has declined, and the behavior of people is the cause of that. So in order to translate Hiri and Otapa, we have to go into an English, which possibly we could use the word wholesome. Both of these terms must be understood. So wholesome moral sense of shame, or we could say a conscience is Hiri, and Otapa is due regard for safety, one's own safety in the future. This voice of conscience and safety is necessary in the individual. And this looks two ways. So one of them looks inward and one of them looks outward. The inward-looking voice is this sense of personal conscience and personal, both a sense of shame, that is, that one could be alone in a situation with nobody watching and yet does not lose their moral sense, still would not transgress certain boundaries. And it doesn't require any external or social observer. And then the other one is an aspect of due regard for the opinion of the wise as well. The element of a personal safety is this idea that you don't want to do things that will have in the future a detrimental effect on your well-being. You should have some sense of wholesome fear for your own safety. Now, there are lots of people out there that don't seem to have it. They live rather recklessly, and they violate the boundaries of good, virtue, and morality, and they are not aware of the consequences, or they do not believe that there are consequences, or they believe that the consequences of their action, if they simply, say, steal something, is going to have a good benefit for them, and they have no idea that such activities might have negative consequences. So part of this idea of Hiri Otapa, the guardians of the world, is that you do have a conviction that your actions have a moral dimension to them, and that the moral dimension is not simply a set of commandments from God or something like this, but that there's an intrinsic element of cause and effect in the moral dimension. There are laws of cause and effect, just as in the physics world. We have this idea that if you add energy to a system, then there are going to be results from that addition of energy to the system. And that objects and material, in the material world, the chemical world, the biological world, operate by laws of cause and effect. And that is what science is. Now, Buddhism also has a law which is included amongst those laws, and that would be the law of karma. And that's the moral volitional cause, and it has consequences. And by the way, so this word karma or karma is now part of the English language. Everybody, that's your karma, dude. Everybody knows this word karma. But they usually they're often using it wrongly, and it's sometimes applied to the consequences of something. So something bad happens to you, and we say that's your karma. Well, it's actually not your karma. That's the results of previous karma. Karma is the intentional action, and something called vipaka, or the fruits of your intentional action, arrive. So this is like not being able to distinguish between cause and effect. Karma is cause, more or less, and vipaka is effect, the results. So this is woven into the fabric of the universe. And by the way, the other laws, the laws of physics, of biology, of psychology, are not neglected in Buddhism. We are not a purely mystical philosophy concerned solely with ideas of moral causality. We also completely accept that there are other normative laws in the world. So in the modern world, science is quite well taught. I mean, it's a pervasive philosophy now. Sometimes it oversteps the boundaries of what science is. Science is a method which shows some very interesting effects of how the universe operates, and it's presumed that these are absolute laws which have no deviations from them. And this is where it kind of steps over the bounds. That's only an assumption that the laws are always normative and never have any suspension of those activities. We would accept that certainly things behave in a causal fashion in the material world on observation. We wouldn't go the extra step to say that they absolutely and always behave in a linear causal structure. And we would also say that all of these other laws are intertwined with the moral laws. Now, in the modern world, there are philosophies that deny that there is any such thing as a moral law, that the previous civilizations of religious civilizations had structures, commandments from God, etc., that were basically based on a lack of understanding or just fabricated. And what the problem is that when you come into modernity with that, you have no possible way of determining what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. And although there are lots of people who advocate that there is no, in fact, moral law, that it's all arbitrary or it's relatively social and so forth, usually you see that people who may articulate that and advocate that usually they do not seem to live fully according to that, because according to that, your types of behavior and your interactions with others should be somewhat arbitrary, or this word absurd, that things have no rhyme or reason in the moral dimension and are just pure arbitrary choices. Most of the sophisticated thinkers who advocate that do not seem to live that way. They seem to abide within the social conventions, and quite often they're actually quite preoccupied with what we would call good behavior or good thought, good speech, good behavior. And so it's although that philosophy is easy enough to come up with, especially in the modern scientific age, it is hard to actually live authentically with denial of moral absolutes. It's hard to live with that. It's hard to live without moral determinism. This, by the way, this attitude is expressed in the time of the Buddha as well. All of these attitudes, which we find in modernity, actually have been fully explored in the time of the Buddha, and you will find them well articulated. The Buddha talks to people who advocate and teach that philosophy, that there are no consequences to either good or bad actions. And the Buddha talks about the teachers who advocate that say that you could distribute gifts on one side of the Ganges River abundantly and then slaughter on the other side of the Ganges River, and there would be no consequences to either of those activities. So this is a complete and absolute denial of any kind of laws of moral resultants. Any kind of moral laws, in fact. This is advocated in modern times by various philosophies. So it's not new to Buddhism. It is new in some ways to the West, and the West is still, Europe and North America are still grappling with these ideas because they're coming out of a Christian past. And Christianity had these strong commandments from God and all this conviction, which gave purpose, meaning, and law to the moral dimension of life. Somewhere in the 19th century or so, it began to drop away and was in some quarters thoroughly gone by the 20th century. But you're left to deal with the results. And by the way, this new notion of the abandonment of universal moral commandments, etc., caused great distress amongst people. You don't come out of a deep religious vision of life and have that abandoned and not feel disoriented. So many express that disorientation, and even to this day you see people leaving various religions and perhaps feeling a sense of relief, but at the same time a sense of dysphoria, kind of disorientation and inability to determine like how then shall one live. This is not such a concern from Buddhist point of view. I think there's more evaluation of this and open evaluation of these, a variety of philosophies and the Buddhist answer to many of these things. So anyway, the Buddha maintains, in the face of various debates at the time, that there is a moral causality, but it's not something that's arbitrated by God. It's as in the same way that physics does not require God to administer the cause and effect in the universe. Moral cause and effect is not necessary to have a supreme deity to enforce or bring about the results of these things. It's just woven into the fabric of reality. So the prediction is by the Buddha that if a society does not maintain this, the individual does not have a personal conscience, due high regard for virtue. And then the Buddha does define what virtue is. And he doesn't regard it as relative to a culture or anything. He just regards it as universally, a universal law. Just like it doesn't matter whether you're from Africa or you're an Eskimo or Italian or wherever you're from, whatever culture, whatever time, the laws of physics apply to you, without regard to your cultural background or your intelligence or any of these things. In the same way, from a Buddhist point of view, the moral cause and effect apply to you. And the essence of these are summarized in the 5 precepts of not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, not lying, and the avoidance of intoxications. That which causes heedlessness of in the moral dimension. So intoxicants can be a wide range of things. Anything which disinhibits you would cause you to step across moral lines and become careless, negligent, etc. So what they say is that the truly good person has due regard for all of these things, the boundaries of not to be injurious to other beings or oneself. And by the way, in the modern times, it's very important. We're in a great debate at this time about such things as euthanasia or various types of practices which are forms of self-harm, and whether it's anybody else's business or not, or whether there is any consequences to these things. Because if you have a philosophy of annihilation at death, then any restraint regarding the taking of one's own life has no consequences to it. So the Buddha advocates that there are consequences to self-injury and the injury to other beings, and not just human beings, but also into the animal realm as well. And that the sensitive, highly moral and virtuous person feels this in their very being, and has enormous regard for the safety of themselves and others. And so this hiri ottappa, this wholesome fear and sense of shame, is the nature of the good person, and it is a universal law that they intuit. So in the same sense as a physicist, an Einstein, etc., intuits incredible processes of the physical world and draws there are virtuosos of the physical world, there are virtuosos of this moral world of cause and effect as well. And when the voice of these people are regarded, others can learn from them and model themselves on their behavior. So they can hold them as examples and learn it. And then as they begin to feel this primary goodness, they will experience it throughout their being as well. So this has a uplifting effect on psychology, your emotion, your heart, your sense of how to proceed through existence is uplifted and you intuit that there are these universal laws. And in a society where this is widely carried out and held up and taught. So by the way, not everybody is gifted in terms of these processes. As we see in physics, you have to start teaching children in elementary school and in high school some very counterintuitive ways that the world behaves. If you remember your physics classes, it's not obvious to everybody how these things. So we make sure that people are educated about this. In a society where the guardians of the world, these loka pala, hiri ottappa, moral fear and moral shame and fear, are maintained, and taught, then that society flourishes, and crime is minimal, and generosity flourishes, concern for others flourish. One does not live in fear of violence from others. The entire nature around it also flourishes as well. And where these things decay, everything goes downhill. Lifespan shortens. The interactions between people are chaotic. There is an increased use of intoxicants. Violence increases. Murder increases. Deception increases. Sexual misconduct increases. All of these, theft increases. And with that, life, the social life declines and can become extremely dismal. On the other hand, in a moral society, everything improves. The quality of life improves, the sharing improves, the sense of safety improves, health improves, mental health improves, and physical health improves. And by the way, those two are not disconnected. You can see where people do not have emotional skills, that they're also their physical health declines. And if one has no sense of personal moral shame and no concern for one's future well-being, then a lot of accidents happen, a lot of negligence happens, etc. So these are why the Buddha talks about these two characteristics as the guardians of the world, but we would say the guardians of civilization, how civilization is maintained. So at the heart of how civilization is maintained is a moral vision of the world. And there have been many civilizations along the way. Empires rise and fall away. And these empires are quite impressive. They have large armies. They execute invasions and take over other countries, and they seem to be dominant and flourish. But then something goes wrong internally and they decline. So you again and again see the rise and fall of whole empires. And what is the mystery of it? Was it the lack of military skill or those kind of things? No, intrinsically it's an internal element, which is the decline of the lokapala, the decline of that which guards civilization, the sense of conscience and concern for both one's own future well-being, not only in this life but beyond, and the well-being of others, and the concern for the opinion of the wise. So there's a whole lots of people that want to disregard anybody else's opinion but their own. They feel that there's an impingement. Why should I listen to anybody else? Everybody does their own thing. I do my own thing. No regard for the opinion of the wise, and maybe there aren't any people who should be called wise, because that's a kind of an absolute statement. And if everything is all relative, then there are no wise people. It's just everybody's opinion. But from this point of view of the Buddha, there are wise people, and there is an absolute law, and there is a skilled and beneficial way of life. And if you can't hear that music, if you can't appreciate the beauty of that and the truth of that, then that individual will decline. And if a whole group of people are living together with that, and without that intuition, then the entire community will decline, the social life of the fabric of the life will decline, and it goes down to an incredible level of abasement. Yes. Not abasement, but to be a very abased way of life. And so this is a brief talk given some of the stories and elements from the suttas can be read. And the Buddha was so articulate and clear on this. And perhaps in future talks, I will talk about some of the suttas where he describes how whole societies unravel and what the bottom of where it finally ends, and how beautiful and how high a community can become, how graceful and abundant and healthy a community can be, and the essential causes of how this can be. The fascinating stories by the Buddha, more or less political theory. So if you think that Buddhism is just strictly a spiritual teaching, it actually stretches far beyond that into suggestions about how to arrange a good political society. So I will leave that for now, and then we will move on to our question and answer period. Pia, what's the first question?
First question is from the live chat from AS in Florida. You spoke a few weeks ago about living in community and how the monastic code, among many other things, teaches how to think of others. I have also heard that the Metta Sutta teaches how to think of others. What are the differences in these teachings on thinking of others? Thank you for your generous wisdom.
Yes, so let's just recapitulate what the Vinaya is. The Vinaya are the rules of conduct for monks and nuns. And they're very detailed, extensive rules. And some of them involve the emotional attitudes of metta, in fact. They advocate that you should have a loving kindness for your fellow monastics. But far beyond that, there are details of specific types of behavior that you expect from your fellow monastics, and which they are obliged also to live up to. So when we talk about metta, the loving kindness sutta, the primary example is as a mother loves and protects her child, her only child. So that's a kind of an emotional attitude which you could cultivate towards all beings in general, and might not be limited to humans, including animals, etc. So with the Vinaya, the rules of conduct for monks and nuns, that you're expected to have that warm attitude, but also the other members of the Sangha have obligations, and they're very demanding obligations, very precise, even down to not slurping your soup, not smacking your lips when you eat, because it might annoy the people around you. How to wear your robes, what sort of physical structures you use in terms of how to sit, how to walk, how to stand, how to relate to people who are senior to you and junior to you, how to relate to your fellow monastics, how to relate to the general population around you, the lay people around you, how to behave in a village or in a city, how to behave when you're in the forest, how to even relate to animals, how to relate to other dimensions of being, the heavens and beyond. So all of that is very finely articulated, so it's a very refined form of polite and a kind of a dance that you learn. And in the first 5 years of a monk's life is devoted to the study and practice of this Vinaya before they are given what's called independence. So for 5 years, you must stay with a community and a teacher who is skilled in this rules of conduct, and you learn both intellectually and in a kind of a habit structure. And you are not allowed to just wander off and be a monk on your own until you have completed those 5 years and you are presumed to have a good grasp of Vinaya. And by the way, if you do not, then you don't pass the course, and you must remain dependent and in community with your teacher until your behavior and your capacity to behave yourself is considered adequate. So the general experience of loving kindness is such a general thing. It's not does not regard fine details of behavior. These type of behaviors also are for monks, and they're not for lay people. There are many things. Monks do not, say, handle money and cannot buy and sell things, and they have a time when they should not eat past a certain time at solar noon. And lay people, it's not moral. It's nothing immoral about handling money or buying or selling or eating at at 8 o'clock at night. It's nothing moral about that, but it's not appropriate for monks and nuns, and where it is, perfectly fine for lay people, and there is no moral element to this. It's just refined types of behavior suitable for certain types of communal living and spiritual practices. So that's, in brief, some of the differences there. Yeah. Pia.
Next question is from Dipsin in West Bengal, India. Dear Ajahn, I recently lost my aunt in a terrible road accident. She had a major role in bringing me up and shaping my value system. It has been a very hard couple of months dealing with the sheer pain of this loss, which is the first of this kind for me. Is there any particular meditation approach that may help in the grieving process?
Well, there are 5 subjects for frequent recollection, which the Buddha advises. And they are, I am of the nature to be ill. I have not gone beyond that. I am the nature to age. I have not gone beyond that. I'm of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond that. All that I have, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. And the last reflection is that I am the inheritor of my moral actions. Whatever I do for good or ill, that I will inherit. So the 4th one, all that I have, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me, is important for everybody to meditate on. Because that people who are beloved to you, things, you both love things and you love people, you love pets and animals, and you love situations, you love activities, all these things, but all of them will become separated from you. You will lose all these things. It's a kind of a grim message to begin with, but eventually it lightens the reality. You're now in tune with reality. So these things don't come as a shock, and they don't come as unfair or an injustice or as terrible news or anything like that. You realize there is no news here. We know as humans that everybody that we know and love must pass away. And they could pass before us or we could pass before them, but one way or the other, we're going to be separated. We're going to lose them. So when we get our minds around that, and by the way, it's not something that is there to terrify you or depress you. It's there to force you to come up with an attitude and a strategy where you can remain healthy, balanced, loving, but always recollecting the facts of life, that none of this is stable. The other recollections, of course, are what happens as well. Illness, aging, death, your own death. But of course, everybody, the 5 recollections applies to everybody. Everybody is subject to illness, aging, death, loss, and responsibility. So it applies to you and applies to everybody else. And the more we rehearse this, the more that just so people pass away. They pass away at all ages. They die at birth sometimes. They die at great old age sometimes, and all in between. And there is no certainty about the time. So no one knows exactly when they're going to die. Unless, of course, you're going to be executed. And even then, sometimes wacky things happen. So we have to be prepared for this, and we rehearse this all the time. For our own sake, it could be at the end of this breath, and for anybody else's sake, it could be at the end of the breath as well. So nothing is certain. Everything is uncertain and out of our control, and that's the life and universe we live in. It doesn't have to be terrifying. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be angry at it. You have to say, I need to live in a positive, loving way in the midst of this fact of life. So that's how to do it. So take up the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. Yeah.
Next question is from the live chat from Andrew in the UK. Dear Ajahn Sona, what is your advice for when one experiences hallucinations and vibrations outside of meditation after intense meditation? Is it an indication of bad practice or an imbalance?
Not necessarily. This does happen, and it's fairly frequent. It's not at all infrequent. And people should be told that such side effects occur. Especially, if you're stepping into something like a silent, a 10-day silent retreat or something like this, quite extreme, without preparation, without experience, and particularly maybe not in a faith culture. So in a culture that is deeply Buddhist and has great faith, say in the monks and in the Buddha and the Dhamma, a person from that culture going into a monastery has a great sense of trust and confidence in these teachings and so forth, and they've heard at least some of the ideas about how the mind works. So they may have less of a psychological side effects than somebody coming in out of a post-Christian or materialist kind of viewpoint into and a kind of a hyper-stimulated society into a sensory deprivation tank, basically. Like a silent retreat, a 10-day silent retreat is sensory deprivation. And it's also silent and no talking. And that's a very, very unusual situation to plunge an individual into. And I really wouldn't put somebody in that situation who has not been gradually brought along. So I give these 10-day silent retreats. But no, I don't let anybody join it if they haven't had previous experience, because it can cause psychotic episodes. It can cause all kinds of things. And I hope that the modern world of abundant meditation retreats starts to catch up with this, that there's unhealthy side effects from these things. And you can't just arbitrarily do this, especially if the teachers themselves are not that adept or experienced about what the effects on people's minds. It's quite. They get the idea of these retreats come from a fairly recent period in Buddhist history where lay people are brought into monasteries for extended periods of time, into retreat centers. This is a feature of fairly modern types of Buddhist practice. Before that, the centuries before that, there weren't any. Certainly, the Buddha never, ever taught a 10-day retreat for lay people, ever. There wasn't a month retreat. There wasn't a day. There are no day retreats. The lay people would come to a talk, perhaps at the monastery or in the community hall in the village, have an invitation. Maybe somebody would invite the Buddha to a meal at their house, and the Buddha would give a short discourse. It's possible to go to the monastery and spend the night there, but not sleeping, just staying up through the night. But most of those experiences were monks were talking through the night, long extended talks, and that's it. And so when we start introducing extended retreats for lay people, and with extended sensory deprivation, absolute silence and strict disciplines and all this, you're going to expect odd side effects. And so it's not something to worry about yourself. I mean, you actually should take better care of yourself. You should decide, well, if that's going to happen to me, I don't think it's a good idea that I go to these extended retreats. I think maybe I'll start with the weekends or a day, or start meditating more at home on a regular basis. Because this is not, to do that to somebody's mind is not good, So this is something that we have to deal with in our reassessment of Buddhism brought to the West, to a different culture, to a different mind, and realize just don't import ideas from the East, from a totally different culture at a totally different time in a totally different way, and drop it into this culture and expect positive results all the time. Some people, of course, do. They have very positive results, and they might not even understand what's being talked about here, but I've taught enough of these retreats over a lot of years to see that there's side effects and there's some problems that come up from this. So yeah, thanks for the question, and please take care of yourself. Yeah.
Next question is from Elizabeth in Glasgow, Scotland. I've heard of a practice that can be taken up for a period of time where you undertake to give away something, food, I think, each day. Could the giving also include what you observe is needed? What is this practice called, and can you please talk a little bit about it?
That's called generosity. So, dana is the Pali word. Dana is a regular practice of generosity, and you practice and get skills in it. One way to do it, like in Asia, in Buddhist cultures, the monks walk through the streets of the village every single morning. So when I was in Thailand, we left the monastery with bowls, and people would come out of their houses and freely offer us food, and they would place them in the bowl. We walk back to the monastery and eat it. So they got a chance to feed the monks every single morning, and there was no obligation to it. We didn't ask for food. They perhaps didn't give it every day. They just did it when it was suitable for them. But the point of it is to encourage the practice of generosity in society. So the Buddha asks the monks to don't be independent, please, monks. Don't grow your own gardens, cook for yourself. Don't do that. We want a connection with the world around you, and we want to encourage their generosity. It won't be a terrible loss to feed a few monks. It's easy to do because there are maybe one monk for every 1,000 people. So now the monk also reciprocates and gives an example of good behavior and gives Dhamma talks, etc. So they feed the society around them with good ideas. And the society around them can offer them one meal a day. The monks are eating minimally and not eating particularly luxuriously, accepting what they get. So this is a strategy by the Buddha. And the regular doing of generosity is very uplifting to the human heart to do that. One way you can do it is every single morning, all you got to do is have a stack of quarters beside your bed and decide on what charity you want to donate to. And every morning when you get up, wash your face, brush your teeth, and then put a quarter in the box that goes to the charity. And once a month, you turn it into whatever it is. But you get a chance to actually thoughtfully and joyfully make a little donation. You don't have to go to a food bank every single day and all. Just there's nothing to it. Just drop a little bit into a jar by your bed, and it's that moment of sharing, of generosity, unsolicited sharing, that it is uplifting and beautiful. Some people don't understand it. They're misers, or they don't understand the beauty of opening the heart, of sharing. If you're not generous, you're living in fear. You're living with a sense of deprivation. Like you're saying, well, I can't possibly do this. What will happen if I need this in the future, and so forth. This makes you can never know if you have enough. But so generosity is a form of courage as well, like to refuse to live in a miserly fashion. Like even if you die, it's better to be generous than be a miserable miser. So you're going to die anyway. You might as well live bravely. And generosity is a form of bravery and loving kindness. And both of those elevate your heart and make life worth living and beautiful to live. So find little ways to do it. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't have to give everything away all the time or anything like this, or feed somebody every single day. It can be just simple, easy to do things like drop a order in the, or any whatever particular amount of money into the container for generosity to something that you choose thoughtfully, some sort of ethical giving. Yeah. Okay, Pia, next question.
Next question is from the live chat from Jay Kala in Argentina. Ajahn, I enjoyed your comments on objectless consciousness in a recent interview. Do you have any advice for approaching teachings such as these in popular circles or with teachers? Thank you.
Yeah, well, the concepts in Buddhism tend to befuddle everybody. The idea of, I think that nibbana or nirvana, certainly while a person is alive, is fairly easy to understand. That this person has arrived at a state of irreversible clarity, generosity, and kindness, and cannot regress from that. So that's the definition of the fully enlightened person. They have achieved nibbana in this very life. Where it becomes basically beyond managing with any reasonable kind of logic is what happens to such a person when they die. Buddhism is very clear about that. When any conscious being dies, the consciousness continues and has structured laws and of rebirth, etc. It's a flowing process, is examined in detail, and it's a fairly easy concept to get a hold of and understand. But is there an end to this? Is there an end to this circle of birth and death? And the Buddha declares that there is. But when you ask carefully and closely what exactly that comprises, what is it when you attain full enlightenment and you are no longer subject to birth and death, and you enter the deathless, what enters the deathless? What is the deathless cessation? Is it complete? Is it annihilation? Is it continuation in some impossible to describe condition, etc.? So this is where you'll see the whole history of Buddhism is bound up with this, and there are endless discussions about this and different takes on this. So don't be too concerned about getting absolute clarity about this. I would say that many people have reached beyond the possibilities of language in trying to assert a positive spin on this, that it just becomes quite apparent that they're describing some form of eternalism, which the Buddha rejected. And so one has to start being content with the fact that nobody in history seems to have clarified this or articulated it any better than the Buddha himself, which is not surprising. So when you look at these things, look how the Buddha talked about this, and you have to be satisfied with that, because there's quite a few people who want to clarify it, that they feel that the Buddha just couldn't quite get the words out, I feel like if the Buddha... We have to be satisfied. The Buddha articulated it as well as it could be, and nobody needs to improve or clarify what the Buddha is saying. And we have to be content with where we're left. And basically, the mind just can't go there with the words that we have available to us and the logical concepts, because the logic itself stumbles at this point. If you present the concepts of what happens at Parinibbana, the death of the Arahant, to somebody trained in logic from the West, they will have a puzzled expression on their face because it's simply unprocessable by any kind of what we would say is the standards of modern philosophical logic. We come across this in other areas of life when you start to get into quantum physics and multi-universes and stuff like this. Your mind, things fall apart as well and become inexpressible. So it's quite all right. One just goes back to the process that there's some sort of experiential thing that happens that is quite beyond expression, and we have to be content with that. So we're content with the inadequacy of language and expressions, and as I say, when you hear teachers talking about things, they're not necessarily logicians, and they're using words in certain ways that on close analysis just don't have very much content to them, or maybe no content. And this is a form of modern philosophy as well. Modern philosophers, language philosophers, have pointed out that some of the things that you can present in terms of sentences and words, when looked at closely, actually don't express anything. So I'm happy with that, and lots of people aren't happy with that. They don't like that. But I'm okay with that. So that's how you should approach this: is be prepared to end in complete puzzlement, and with the acceptance that it's not very intelligent, logical people can't get any meaning out of some of the advanced structures of Dhamma. And that's just the way it is. But it doesn't mean that Dhamma is something that is meaningless or anything like that. There is meaning to it, and the process towards this Nibbana is very meaningful, very precise, very, very experiential. But beyond that, be prepared to hear silence. There's a saying, maybe it's Bertrand Russell, or what can't be said, and can't be whistled either. Yes.
Our next question is from Robert in Cape Town, South Africa. When the illusion of the separate self is realized, what does the observer then observe?
Well, first of all, I would ask about the separate self, the illusion of the separate self. This sounds a little like non-dual language, this term non-dual, which I never use. I don't like to use the word non-dual. It's just not a part of the Theravada vocabulary. And the idea of a separate self. It's not a separate self. There's no self. There's not an illusion of a separate self. There's an illusion of a self. So it's not, and it's not about oneness either. It's not about it's not about two-ness, it's not about non-two-ness, and it's not even about oneness. It's about noneness. It's about noneness. Yeah. So what we're doing is simply this, is that it's just like certain kinds of physics where there's presumed to be objects in the universe, such as atoms. The word atom means that which is uncuttable, indivisible. So this is a Greek philosophical term. Atom, not cuttable. So they had the idea that there must be absolute things at the bottom of everything. There's got to be a thing that you can't cut. Well, it turns out the atom is cuttable. We can't find the we can't find the uncuttable. We can't find it in the physical universe, and we can't find it in the psychological universe. We can't find the irreducible self. So it's just a bad concept. The sense of a stable self traveling through time is just a mistake And when you undo that mistake, nothing happens. It was always the case that there was never a substantial self, and everything goes on just as it used to. You get up, you eat, etc. But you're not using a wrong theory about reality and about yourself. So there we have a paradox of language. I just said yourself. So when we say self, it's like a noun, but it should be a verb. You're selfing. And it's just inadequacy of language again. Language as to describe the universe is very useful and handy to have nouns and treat the world as if it consisted of a bunch of objects. We have processes as well. You run, you fly, all these are processes, but there's a thing that runs, but there is no thing that runs. There's just running. So this is you're just dissolving the nouns into verbs, but it's very awkward to speak in verbs. So we just use conventional language, but we don't confuse the conventions of language with absolute reality. So there's just a freedom of coming to grips with the selfing process as you as a verb rather than a noun. See, then I have to say you, which is a pronoun, as a verb, youing. So it's a language game, but reality is flow. That's all it is. So thanks for the question. Next. One more question. I think we're coming to the end of the hour. Yeah.
Our final question today will be from the live chat from Bob in Texas. How do I come to terms with my military job where I was indirectly responsible for hundreds of deaths? And if history had been different, it would have been hundreds of thousands.
Right. And it's a matter of working out, to some degree, whether indirect responsibility is any responsibility. So sometimes people overdue the effects of their actions. So from a karmic point of view, there's two things that make you guilty of, say, killing a person. One is you intend to kill a person and you carry out the action and the result is they die. Now then you have the karma of that. You have intentionally killed a person and carried it out themselves. The next level is you asked somebody specifically or directed them to kill somebody, and they went ahead and did it. They accomplished the task. Then you're also responsible. And you see in a court of law, this is handled properly in a court of law. You either you're guilty of homicide by both doing it directly and also by ordering somebody else to do it, and they carry it out. So in the criminal world, if the boss tells somebody to kill, the boss will often get a heavier sentence than the person who carries out the crime. So, but if you happen to work in a place like you work as the janitor in a slaughterhouse, or you work with the military building barracks or something like this. You're part of the military, but you're not either directly involved in pulling the trigger intentionally to kill, because you can pull the trigger not intending to kill. There's accidents and there's unintentional results, and that's not karmic, but it's intention, action, and results that do this. So you would have to do direct order. You would have to directly order somebody to kill somebody, and they would carry it out and accomplish that. That would be direct responsibility. Now, if you've done that, then it's done. And now you have thought better of it, perhaps. You think, that was a bad idea. I don't believe in that anymore, but it's done. And you can't expunge that. But you can do actions in the opposite direction, that which promotes life, that which protects life, and you make determinations not to take life. And that will have positive results in the opposite direction. And it's best not to think about it. Everybody has done something unskillful. Should you increase the lack of skill? Should you go over it again and again, feeling guilty and tormenting yourself? See, now you're doing something cruel to yourself. Or should you stop thinking about it and get on with doing something in the opposite direction, the good? You should do that. The Buddha says, don't dwell on the past. And of course, we have some examples. The particular one is Angulimala, who killed a lot of people. And the reason why was he was actually under direct orders to kill some people, and he did. And he didn't know that he shouldn't. So he went ahead and did it, and of course there were consequences to that. But he had, in fact, attained enlightenment, slept like a baby, had no remorse whatsoever, because he is now not the same person. He is now not a killer, not dangerous to anybody. And so his prior persona of that which threatened other beings and killed is simply not who he is now. And so the Buddha makes an example of that. He says, this is possible. You can change. And when you do change, you are not any longer that person. There may be karmic consequences from these past actions, and probably will be, but there can also, and you can't cancel those, but you can put in the causes for good results in the future, and you should not dwell on the past. You should dwell on the present and the future. So don't do anything that you will regret in the present, and determine not to do anything you will regret in the future, and get some amnesia about the past. Stop thinking about it, because it just makes it worse. Yeah. So I will leave that for your reflection today.